6 seconds is all that separates a racial slur from an eternal lesson in applied physics and human dignity. On that sweltering afternoon in 1964, Oakland, time seemed to turn elastic, stretching under the weight of a tension that no one there knew how to name or contain. What was about to unfold would not be a mere gym brawl, but the founding of a myth that would change the world's perception of technical skill over raw mass. The heavy air promised an irreversible transformation, the fall of an arrogant giant, and the silent rise of a master who didn't need to shout to be heard. The audience is invited to witness the exact moment where prejudice collides with the mechanical perfection of the human body, resulting in a catharsis that would echo for decades through the deafening silence of Bruce Lee. The promise here is absolute. Poetic justice will be delivered with the precision of a Swiss watch, without a single wasted movement or emotion. There is a visceral expectation in seeing a categorical aggressor neutralized by someone he deeply underestimates, based solely on physical appearance and ethnic origin. The central shock lies in the absurd contrast between the hate-filled verbal offense and the physical response that follows, so swift that human eyes can barely process the sequence of events. This is not a story of revenge, but of a transition in status, where the unwanted outsider reveals himself as the absolute master of the space they tried to deny him. Prepare to observe how the 6-second interval between the end of an offensive sentence and the impact of a body on the floor can completely redefine the hierarchy of power in a hostile environment. In this scenario, lethal violence is discarded in favor of a technical superiority that humiliates without leaving physical scars, proving that true mastery is the ability to end a conflict before it even becomes a fight. Bruce's goal is silent and profound: to earn the right to exist and teach in that sacred territory of brute force without betraying his own philosophy of combat and composure. Every heartbeat in this narrative tells a story of resistance and the validation of a new way of fighting, where minimum effort yields maximum results. The viewer will feel the atmospheric pressure rise as passive hostility transmutes into active aggression, setting the stage for the decisive moment where the fate of two men will be sealed by the subsensory reaction speed of a martial arts genius. The old-school bodybuilding gym in Oakland, California, operates as a sanctuary of cast iron, where the dominant sound is the metallic clang of heavy plates colliding against the concrete floor. The air is thick, saturated with the acrid smell of old sweat, chalk powder, and the lingering heat of a summer afternoon in 1964. Through high, dusty windows, shafts of sunlight cut through the room, revealing dust motes dancing over the sweaty bodies of men who see brute strength as the only universal language. It is a territory of testosterone and rustic hierarchies, where every weightlifter occupies his space with a silent territorial aggressiveness, shaped by the aesthetic of an era that valued size above any other technical or philosophical virtue. The period is marked by a latent racial tension permeating the streets of California, manifesting in that gym as a veiled resistance to the presence of foreigners, especially those who dare to teach Oriental martial arts. An unwritten code exists among the locals. Strength is measured in pounds and inches of biceps, and any method that does not involve physical crushing is viewed with suspicion and mockery. Bruce Lee, with his compact physical frame and fluid movements, is a visual anomaly in that ecosystem of giants. His presence there is not just tolerated, it is monitored by eyes seeking any sign of weakness to validate the prejudice that sustains the social order of that iron gym, turning the environment into a powder keg. Within this setting, Bruce positions himself in an isolated corner, using equipment that looks rudimentary next to the large bench presses, but which he handles with mathematical precision. He does not belong to that world of roars and slow movements. His practice is silent, focused on economy of motion and controlled explosion. While other fighters display their power in noisy demonstrations of effort, Bruce cultivates an internal energy that goes unnoticed by most. The hostility in the air is palpable, an invisible pressure that seems to push the walls of the gym inward, creating a vacuum of expectation where the slightest slip in etiquette or territoriality will serve as a pretext for a confrontation everyone there secretly desires. The emotional climate of the gym is one of constant surveillance. The locals watch Bruce like predators analyzing an exotic prey that refuses to show fear. Every exercise he performs, every controlled breath, is interpreted as a challenge to the hegemony of the local alpha male. There is no dialogue, only the rhythmic sound of training and the occasional murmur of disdain floating between the weight benches. The social structure of the old school is rigid and dangerous, based on the belief that physical dominance is the only valid property right. Bruce is on enemy soil, a master of fluidity surrounded by mountains of stone, awaiting the inevitable moment when ignorance will attempt to test the integrity of his newly created combat philosophy. The physical disparity between the men in the gym becomes the focus of all eyes as Big Mike approaches Bruce's corner. Mike is a mountain of muscle shaped by boxing and weightlifting, a man whose body seems built for collision and crushing. Beside him, Bruce looks almost fragile, a thin-boned intruder dressed in clothes the locals consider strange for a place for real men. The inequality is not just visual, but symbolic. On one side, an absolute belief in mass and volume as tools of dominance. On the other, a figure who personifies agility and kinetic intelligence. The pressure builds as Mike invades Bruce's personal space, forcing a comparison that, for the onlookers, already has a predetermined winner before the first move is even made. The contrast in stances is revealing to anyone observing the nuances of tension. While Big Mike displays an expansive and loud body language, occupying as much space as possible with his broad shoulders and heavy steps, Bruce remains retracted, operating within an invisible cylinder of containment. The opposing force gains confidence through Bruce's silence, interpreting his lack of verbal reaction as a sign of submission or fear. Mike's friends cluster around, forming a semicircle of crossed arms and mocking grins, creating a makeshift arena where Bruce's social isolation becomes absolute. He is the outsider, the intruder talking philosophy in a temple of iron, and the crowd around him senses that the time to correct this anomaly has finally arrived. Small signs of conflict begin to emerge from the inertia. Mike stops inches from Bruce, letting the scent of his sweat and his shadow cover the master. He doesn't attack immediately but uses microaggressions, an accidental kick to one of Bruce's pieces of equipment, and a look of contempt that sweeps the Chinese man from head to toe. The tension doesn't explode. It accumulates like static electricity before a lightning strike. Bruce continues his breathing exercise, his eyes fixed on a neutral point, ignoring the mountain of flesh trying to provoke him. This refusal to validate the aggressor's presence further enrages Mike, who sees Bruce's calm as an insult far deeper than any word spoken aloud. The escalation reaches its tipping point when verbal aggression finally breaks through the sound of the weights. Mike can no longer stand Bruce's technical indifference and decides that silence must be shattered by the brute force of his status. He represents the segregationist system of that era, the voice of insecurity masked by a xenophobia that refuses to be ignored. The emotional pressure reaches saturation level, the other gym-goers stop training, the plates cease their metallic clatter, and the world seems to shrink until it fits into that small patch of mat. The inequality of forces is at its peak, and the promise of imminent physical humiliation hangs over Bruce, who remains the calm eye of a hurricane about to touch down. The moment of maximum compression peaks when Big Mike, fueled by Bruce's silence, violently kicks the light weights the master was using. The sound of metal echoing against the cement floor serves as the opening bell, but Bruce does not move. The space between the two combatants shrinks to the distance of an extended arm, a kill zone where physics will replace rhetoric. Mike puffs out his chest, his heavy, irregular breathing contrasting with Bruce's rhythmic and almost imperceptible ventilation. Time begins to slow for those watching. The master does not look into Mike's eyes, but at the center of his mass, monitoring every micro-adjustment of weight and muscle tension that precedes an attack. He knows that Mike's error is his greatest weapon, and the giant's blind confidence is the trigger that will fire the chain reaction. The atmosphere in the gym becomes a vacuum where sound seems to be sucked into the epicenter of the conflict. Bruce demonstrates self-control bordering on the superhuman, keeping his hands low but with tendons ready for the explosion of Jeet Kune Do. He performs a subsensory reading of the environment, mapping the position of every spectator and the layout of the machines around him, ensuring there will be no obstacles to his defensive mechanics. Mike, on the other hand, charges with the certainty of someone who has won 1,000 street fights based on size alone, unaware that he is entering a biomechanics laboratory where his brute force will be used against him. The air vibrates with the latent threat. The predator believes he has cornered the prey, not noticing that the prey has already redesigned the exit map. The final insult is hurled with a voice laced with venom and self-proclaimed authority. "Hey, why don't you pack your things and go back to China? This is a place for real men." The words hang in the air like toxic smoke, while the silence that follows is absolute, broken only by the dripping of sweat on the iron plates. Bruce finally raises his gaze, not with anger, but with terminal clarity. He has accepted the challenge not out of pride, but out of moral necessity. The verbal aggression is the seal that authorizes the technical response. Mike initiates a double push movement, projecting his entire weight forward, a gesture intended to hurl the smaller man against the wall, believing the fight would end before Bruce even had time to react. At this threshold, Bruce's internal decision is made. He will not allow the opponent's first attack to be completed, but he will also not allow his own integrity to be corrupted by hate. He becomes the interceptor, the master of the way of the intercepting fist. Every muscle in his body is in a state of elastic readiness, awaiting the millisecond when Mike's inertia becomes irreversible. The onlookers hold their breath, feeling that the balance of the world in that gym is hanging by a thread. Time narrows into a funnel of causality where Bruce's past training and Mike's present arrogance are about to collide. All that remains are the promised 6 seconds, the exact interval where philosophy will become impact and the fate of both will be rewritten. The instant Mike's massive hands project forward, time for Bruce Lee seems to fragment into frames of pure analysis. He does not retreat. Instead, he slides a millimeter off the line of force, allowing the giant's aggression to find only a void. With a movement the spectator's eyes can barely register, the master executes the first second of his response. An open hand block that diverts Mike's center of gravity, transforming the aggressor's push into an assisted freefall. The physics of Jeet Kune Do take over, where Bruce's circular motion absorbs the opponent's linear energy, neutralizing the weight advantage and turning Mike's mass into a lever against himself. The 4th second is marked by the psychological shock that defines technical superiority. As Mike tries to regain his balance, Bruce launches a straight lead punch, a direct strike that travels the shortest distance between 2 points at subsensory speed. Bruce's fist stops exactly 5 millimeters from the tip of Mike's nose, halting in midair with a controlled vibration. The impact is not physical, but mental. Mike feels the displacement of air and shuts his eyes, expecting pain that does not come, realizing in a fraction of a second that his life and physical integrity are entirely in the hands of the man he had just insulted. The immobility of Bruce's fist is more terrifying than any blow, for it demonstrates total mastery over his own strength and over another's space. Without giving the aggressor time to process the mercy, Bruce executes the final movement in the 6th second. With an imperceptible hip rotation and a technical sweep applied to Mike's supporting heel, he uses the giant's own weight to complete the lesson. Mike's body, deprived of a base and still under the effect of his initial attack's inertia, crashes onto the central mat with a dull thud that makes the weights on the racks rattle. There was no exchange of punches, no endurance fight. There was only a demonstration of cause and effect, where Bruce Lee remained the still axis of a wheel that turned and discarded the debris. Mike lies on his back, panting, without a single scratch, but completely stripped of his dignity. The invisible stopwatch stops. Exactly 6 seconds have transformed the gym's alpha male into a vulnerable and confused figure, lying at the feet of a man who hasn't even lost his breathing rhythm. The silence that settles over the old school is of a different quality now. It is no longer the silence of expectation, but that of absolute disbelief. The other fighters, who expected to see Bruce crushed, stand static, their eyes fixed on a scene that defies all the logic of strength they have cultivated for years. Bruce remains standing in a relaxed state of readiness, looking down without anger, without triumph, only with the clarity of one who has fulfilled a necessary mechanical task to restore order and respect in that sacred space. The silence that falls over the gym after Mike hits the floor is thick, almost solid, broken only by the metallic ring of a plate vibrating in some distant corner. Disbelief freezes the faces of those present. The mountain of flesh and arrogance that dominated the room now lies fallen, staring at the ceiling with an expression of total disorientation. Mike wasn't just knocked down, he was dismantled by the surgical precision of a man he considered insignificant. However, the moment of greatest impact is not the fall, but what happens immediately after. Bruce Lee, without any trace of exultation or contempt on his face, breaks his combat stance and extends an open hand to the fallen opponent. It is a gesture of humanity that cuts through the racial tension and the hate in the air, offering Mike an honorable way out of his own humiliation. This moral decision by Bruce completely redefines the meaning of the confrontation for everyone watching. By choosing not to deliver a finishing blow or hurl an insult back, he transforms the fight into a masterclass in etiquette and superiority of character. The extended hand is a silent invitation for Mike to recognize that real strength lies not in the ability to oppress, but in mastery over oneself. The aggressor, still panting and eyes wide from the shock of the fist that stopped millimeters from his face, stares at Bruce's hand with a mixture of fear and shame. The lesson is complete. Bruce didn't defeat an enemy. He neutralized a threat, and at the same time established a new moral hierarchy within that hostile territory, where the winner's compassion is the deadliest weapon. The reaction of the world around them changes instantly. Mike, unable to accept Bruce's hand due to wounded pride, pushes himself up heavily on his own and retreats to the locker rooms without saying a single word. His aura of dominance vanished forever. The other gym members, who previously watched with contempt, now stopped their training to look at Bruce with genuine curiosity and a reluctant respect. The air of passive hostility dissolves, giving way to an implicit acknowledgement that something extraordinary happened there. Bruce Lee retrieves his equipment and returns to his training as if nothing occurred, but the environment at the old school will never be the same. The gym, once a bastion of exclusion, became in that brief instant a silent witness to Bruce's transition from an unwanted stranger to an indisputable master. Weeks after the incident, the validation of Bruce Lee's dominance manifested in a silent but irrefutable way. Two of Big Mike's closest friends crossed the gym's threshold, not to intimidate, but to request instruction from the man they once despised. They confessed that Mike never again mentioned those 6 seconds, but his conduct had changed drastically. The giant who used to patrol the gym with xenophobia now avoided conflict and had ceased all harassment of immigrants in the Oakland area. The technical defeat had sparked an internal moral correction that words could never reach. Bruce's silence not only protected his integrity, but served as the catalyst for a profound cultural shift within that sanctuary of iron, proving that the truth of the body is impossible to ignore. This event became the founding myth of Bruce Lee's philosophy in his academy, establishing the principle that martial arts are not for winning fights, but for ending conflicts definitively. The legacy left on that central mat transcended the context of 1964, becoming living proof that technique overcomes mass, and that dignity is the final answer to racism. Bruce's presence in Oakland ceased to be seen as an intrusion, and came to be recognized as a biomechanical and ethical revolution. He proved that an arm's length is territory enough to rewrite a man's destiny, transforming aggressors into silent witnesses of a superiority that required no external validation to exist. His art was, above all, a tool of liberation through mastery. The story closes with a reflection that echoes far beyond the walls of that old weightlifting gym. Bruce Lee established that true strength lies in the ability to neutralize hate without becoming part of it, using precision to educate where brute force would only succeed in destroying. The spectator is left with an implicit question about the nature of power. What is more effective, defeating an enemy through pain or transforming them through the shock of their own technical insignificance? That afternoon in Oakland, Bruce Lee's silence spoke louder than any war cry, making it clear that you don't need to shout to be heard, but you must be prepared for when silence is no longer an option. Mastery, after all, is the definitive answer to any form of prejudice.